Today's video is about the steps component of agent engineering. This is part 10 in a 14-part series. When creating a custom agent, the most important part is creating a task markdown file. This has 5 components: a role, a task, steps, analysis, and examples. Today we're going to focus on the steps section. The steps section of a task markdown file does not describe what it should be done. That is the purpose of the task section. Instead, it explains how. Most task markdown files have a steps section which consists of a numbered sequence of steps, each referencing terms defined in the task section. Each step must be described as precisely as possible. Though most steps consist of simple English instructions, it is possible to include variables, conditions, and even loops, and we'll demonstrate each of these in turn next. Okay, so this is Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to create a simple task markdown file which creates 3 variables, a long string, a number, and a short string. Then I'll combine them and display them to the user. Now you might want to pause the video for a second here. Observe how my 3 variables, I use a backtick to call them out. Any way we make it more obvious to the AI that this is a special thing, a variable, that's better. Notice how I can use an assignment operator, I can use quotes for the string or not. It's really completely up to you. Now I'm going to demonstrate this one in ChatGPT. I'm going to say, hey, please take a look at my instructions, and it's going to execute it and observe it's exactly the text that I anticipated. Now, before the values of my variables were fixed, this time I'm going to prompt the user for them. Observe how after I put the text to the prompt, I have the explicit message, please pause until the user puts input. Sometimes it goes on. And then I tell AI exactly where to put the data, in this case, into a variable. Now, just for fun, I decided to do some math. I prompted for the birth year and computed the age. And of course, you can do things like this when data is in a variable. Now I'm going to demonstrate this one with Microsoft Copilot. Any LLM will work. And this time, instead of just giving me a prompt and an output, it's going to ask me 3 follow-up questions. And it works exactly like I expected. Okay, let's put this all together into a single useful tool. In this case, my agent is going to ask me for a research topic, how many sources I want, and then provides a nice little summary with the sources all at once. And of course, my prompt, the response, as well as the sources will all be stored in variables. Now, the way I like to write these things is I first outline the steps, and then I fill in the text that makes those steps come true. It kind of makes it work like an outline, and then I fill in the details later, and it works well for me. Now, just pause the video if you like to see the complete text of my task markdown file. Now this time I'll use Gemini as my large language model. Here I'm going to upload my task markdown file, and then I'm going to say, hey, please run this prompt. And of course I get the answer I'm looking for. In this case, I want to research what is agent engineering. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears a little bit. We learned how to use variables. Now we're going to learn how to use conditionals, namely if statements. Now with programming languages, we have to be very specific about the syntax, but with large language models, we could be pretty free-form. In this case, I want to see if a grade, a number grade, is within the valid range. Is it within 0 and 100%? So I'm going to use Claude this time, and I'm going to ask it to upload the instructions, and I'm going to execute it, and of course it's going to prompt me for a grade. Now I'm going to run through 2 test cases here. The first one is 106, which is going to be invalid, and the second one is 76, which is valid. And notice how I get different output according to the input that I give. Now let's extend our example here. We're going to go from just 2 conditions, valid to invalid, to 4 different conditions, and we're going to give the user a different kind of message depending upon the input is given. And this is based on an if, else if statement. But you know what? I can also be kind of free form because AI really understands synonyms and different ways you present the same information. So in this case, I'm going to present the conditions not as an if-else if, as we'd expect in a programming language, but rather as a simple bulleted list, sort of analogous to a switch case statement in a programming language, and it totally understands it. So I'm using Microsoft Copilot this time, and I'm going to run the task markdown file. It's going to prompt me for my grade, and I'm going to run through a bunch of test cases. Observe how I just have to say, hey, run it again, and hey, do it again, to run the same instructions again and again. And all my different test cases work just as we'd expect. Now, to highlight the power of AI, I'm going to write myself a practical application with these conditionals. In this case, I want to write an agent to determine the tone of an email. And based on the tone, I'm going to produce different error messages like, hey, that's a little harsh, or overly friendly, or not professional, or maybe come across a little more strong, whatever. And each one of these is going to determine its condition in a non-trivial way using the full power of AI. Now observe I'm using if, else, if to identify the tone, and then for the display, I'm showing the different cases in a table, and AI totally understands this. As before, you might want to pause the video to take a look at the final prompt. Now I'm going to use Google Gemini for this particular one, and I'm first going to put a tone that's a little bit harsh, and then I'm going to put a tone that's a little bit over-friendly, and then I'm going to put a tone that's a little bit weak, and observe how it detects the tones and gives a reasonable error message each time. Okay, let's shift gears. Now we use variables, we use conditionals, and next is to do loops. The first example we're going to do is we're going to do a countdown from like the user-provided value, say 8, down to 1. And as before, you might want to pause the video, take a look at the final task markdown file. Okay, we're going to use XAI's grok to execute this one, and observe it does in fact count from 8 down to 1. Now, not only can we loop through numbers, we can also loop through a collection. In this case, I'm going to loop through a collection of animals and display some important trivia about each one of them. And again, you might want to pause the video to see how you can recreate this agent yourself. Now we're going to use ChatGPT this time, and it's going to have no prompts. It's just going to run through my collection and tell me my important facts. Now, sometimes we don't know how many times we're going to go through the list. We don't know ahead of time how many we're going to count to or how many elements are in the collection. So in this case, we want to keep looping until an event is reached. In this case, my daughter wants to know how many cookies she can have, and she is not going to stop until she has more than 2 cookies. Now, initially, I'm going to be a good daddy and say she can have no cookies or only 1 cookie and 2 cookies, but finally she wears me down and she says, "Thank you, Daddy, la da 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 da." Okay, so in our final real-world example using loops, we're going to prompt the user for a paragraph. We're going to break that down into a collection of individual facts. We're going to loop through each individual fact, look it up to see if it's truthful or not, and display an error message, either that it's the correct fact, it's incorrect, or we don't have enough information to proceed. Now, I'm both going to use a for loop to walk through the list of every fact identified, and I'm going to use a while loop. In other words, after I finish verifying one paragraph, I'm going to prompt the user if they want to continue, and if they say yes, I'll loop back to step 1 and do it all again. Super common technique I use in many of my agents. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to have a paragraph that has many facts and incorrect things as well. Then I'm going to say, yes, I want to do it again, and then once again, I'll have another paragraph that has 1 fact is incorrect and 1 fact is correct, and it works exactly like I expect. So I use variables, if statements, and loops frequently in my agents. And when you learn how to master these techniques, you become a programmer. Of course, not in a high-level language like Python or C++, but in regular English in a markup language. Try it yourself.